In this video, I'm going to start a series about restoring my old truck. It was my first truck, and it was the first vehicle all my girls drove. It's been through 3 engines, 2 paint jobs, and for the last 10 years, pretty much all it's done is sit. For the restoration style, I'm going for kind of a Mad Max meets steampunk, and I'm starting with the center console. That's the hole we gotta fill. And clean. With the shutdown, things are tight, so the challenge is to make it with stuff I already have on hand and clean out the garage in the process. I built this RC box for my Arma Granite and it worked out okay, but it was too bulky to travel with. Looked about the right size, so I stripped it down, stuck it in the void. And it fit, but it needed some modification to clear the hydraulics for the dump hoist. Did I mention it's a dump truck? I started out trying to make it curve around the hydraulic unit, but there were other things in the way. So it fits for the most part, other than the back of it is sitting on the solenoid and it needs to come up like this, but I'd really rather it go down, so I'm debating on whether to cut that back off altogether so I can keep it flush with the seats and then do a high rise here to cover all that stuff, or I don't know. I ultimately decided to cut the back off altogether because it wouldn't be seen much anyway. We are definitely getting closer. I decided I'll seal off the back of that box, and the armrest part will just kind of sort of fill that in, or I'll do something different back there. But the one thing keeping it is this line coming off the dump. There. The one thing keeping it from doing what I want is that, so I'm gonna notch that out. Then I may have to just put like a 1-inch spacer or something underneath the armrest. I wanted to add some angles to give it a little character, so I cut the corners off at 45 degrees and ripped a couple of scrap pieces of 1/4-inch plywood that was also cluttering up the garage. After attaching the new front pieces, I rounded off the corners and sanded everything down with 150 grit. I didn't really have a clear picture in my head when I started this, so I just kept putting the console in the truck for inspiration. I figured I'd just let the project tell me what it wanted to look like. I decided to try to make the bottom part look like an old copper tub of sorts. I used an old can of Bondo to fill the gaps and the tear out from my unconventional cuts. Then it was time to move on to the storage box and armrest combo. I decided to make this have the feel of a vintage piece of luggage. I used scrap plywood to build a smaller square box that would bolt onto the copper tub. This cheap plywood had more waves than a rodeo queen, and I had to wrestle it into compliance, putting my hand in harm's way. If you don't like the sight of blood, look away now. Here I am cutting the lid off the box. After this, it'll get the Bondo treatment, but you've seen that already. The way I'm attaching the 2 parts is with threaded inserts and 1/4x20 bolts. This makes it so I can easily separate them if I need to service the hydraulics. Plus, I love threaded inserts, and I had a bunch laying around, so it wasn't breaking the rules. The cup holder will be made out of barnwood. This is really starting to look like it was made with spare parts. Because it was, I guess. I'm mocking it up with wood dowels, but in the end it'll have 30/30 cartridges supporting it. To get the surface prepped for paint, I coated both pieces with fiberglass resin. I had it, and it was the best idea I could come up with without going to the store and violating the challenge. After the resin dried, I sanded everything with 180 grit and decided to use some automotive primer that I had left over from another project that had been sitting around for a while. It took about a 20-minute stir to get it to mix. This is supposed to be an all-in-one epoxy, filler, and sealer. Can't decide if I like it yet. I put down 2 coats of primer and sanded most of it off with 180 grit. Then 2 more coats and sanded with 600 grit. Then it was time for paint. Felt like a shame using rattle can over that good primer, but it was what I had. If it doesn't hold up, I'll come back and do it with the good stuff when money's not so tight. I used copper for the base. My intention was to put down a clear coat and then some black spray paint to add a weathered look, but apparently the project had other ideas because the clear just blew off. I gave everything a good scuff in hopes that the black accents wouldn't blow off like the clear. Then I just lightly dust on some black for the weathering. After the black was dry, I took a coarse scuff pad and scratched in some character marks. After a lot of head scratching, I decided to add some accents to the front of the bottom unit. I took some scrap masonite, also known as hardboard, cut them to fit the bevels, then added these little wooden buttons so I can make them look like riveted brass pieces. Here's a quick tip for masonite. If you're going to spray paint it, give it a couple of coats of sanding sealer, paying special attention to the edges. Without it, you use a whole can of paint just trying to get good coverage. I followed up with primer and bright gold spray paint. I scuffed them down to take off the shine. Then I did a little airbrush work with black and transparent brown to add the tarnish. I know that brass and copper usually have a greenish patina, but I wasn't feeling the green in the overall color scheme. I finished up with a coat of satin clear. I also made this bar out of PVC and then gave it the same treatment. With the lower half all decorated, or as Vicky says, with its jewelry on, it was time to turn my attention to the top box. I always have leather around, so I wanted to create a dummy buckle that looked like it was holding it closed. I cut a strip of leather to look like it was attached to the buckle on the bottom. I treated the leather with saddle soap and olive oil, and instead of inducing any weathering, I'll just let Mother Nature do it. Then it was time to put it all together. The part I forgot to shoot was the subwoofer hiding in the bottom box. No, it's not an ideal enclosure, but I think it'll be okay. With the centerpiece done, I can design the rest of the interior around it. This was a fun build. I repurposed a bunch of stuff for a different function as if I was in an apocalypse. I just hope we're not. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.